My name is Kent Hudson, and I am the Executive Director of the Community Foundation of PEI. And we are thrilled to be hosting everyone to an informative session, which it will be, on a really great app called the Giftabulator. And what better day than Giving Tuesday, obviously, a day dedicated to celebrating generosity and giving. So, first and foremost, thanks to everyone who took the time to join us today. And a note that we are recording this session, and we'll share that with everyone at the completion. And I want to say a special thank you to our official partners for the foundation, Provincial Credit Union and PEI Mutual Insurance Company. Without their support, we couldn't do these kinds of initiatives. So thanks to them. And it is now my pleasure to introduce our presenter today, Bill Petrick. He is the founder, president, and CEO and guru of all things of a company called Funding Matters, Inc. And he's the brains behind the app you're about to receive a demo on. Bill has 30 plus years of experience in fundraising and far too many projects to mention. And I won't waste any more of your time. And I will turn things over to Bill now so he can share some great information with everyone. Over to you, Bill.
Thanks, Kent. And as you've mentioned, today is Giving Tuesday and an opportunity to think about our year-end giving, but things that we can be grateful for in terms of the communities and the services and the programs that are made available, and how each and every one of us can be not only thinking about our own planning, but our planning for our finances, our estates, as well as for philanthropy. So, as Kent mentioned, I've got over 30 years of experience in fundraising. We've run campaigns from, from 5 million to $500 million campaigns in terms, but over time, what we've seen is the opportunities for engagement with charitable organizations, transforming from volunteer time with organizations to actually, I don't have the time to volunteer, but I'd love to find ways to actually make an impact for your organization that I care so deeply about. And that is kind of the genesis of where we came up with the idea for Giftabulator. Giftabulator was just beyond a spreadsheet, but it became sort of a discussion document of how individuals can start thinking about their own planning with their advisors and their families around the impact they can have for their families, but also the impact that they can have for their communities. And that was kind of the notion that really sat with us. It was probably about 30 years ago that I actually sat with a donor and had the donor actually explain to me how they were going about looking at making this donation to an organization that I was involved with. And they took the time to actually explain that the best ways for them to think about giving were, things that they would have the greatest impact with, but secondly, have the least amount of impact on them in terms of their assets. So, what do I mean by that? What we looked at was the opportunity to actually create a presentation that would look at, if I wrote a check, where is that donation coming from? It's coming from my checking account. And the money in my checking account, I've already paid the tax on. But at the same time, I've got investments, and I may have investments that are either stocks, mutual funds, registered investments, things along those lines, that if they've grown in value and at some point I'm going to be selling them, that idea of not paying tax if I were to use those assets to make a donation, that would become a bit of a starting point for me thinking about my financial planning, my estate planning, and my philanthropic planning. Because the donation that this one individual had, and I'll go into a couple of different scenarios within Giftabulator in a moment or so. But the idea was that they felt that they could top up whatever they're going to be owing in tax from their invested accounts and not paying the tax on that appreciated asset donation and having a greater impact for the organization. And after that individual made that donation, he and his family continued to give in that same manner. So let me kind of just go into a little bit of a presentation here. That and we've developed this for community foundations, hospitals, universities, museums, galleries across North America. But one of the things this is customized to the community foundation of Prince Edward Island, and with Kent, we've really enjoyed sort of building this out and tailoring it and customizing it for Prince Edward Island for various individuals, families, for wealth advisors, because no donation should be executed without having the professional advisors as part of the dialogue for this discussion. But one of the things that we always look at are the opportunities, and this is how it's tailored to CFPEI. It's really to have giving now and looking at just like that example of the individual that I was speaking of. And I'll show you different ways to look at this same scenario, is to look at the give now. And looking at where we're at this point is giving now before year end may be applicable to a number of you, whether you're individuals or organizations, as you're doing your outreach to your constituents, or you're actually looking at making a donation. The Give Now scenario provides the opportunity between now and year end to think about either a donation that may be coming from an appreciated asset. Secondly, is we start to look at Willable, and Willable is all based around estate planning. And we start to look at the notion of estate planning. You start to look at in your estates, how many people actually have a charitable bequest that is actually created with or constructed within their will. And the answer to that is 4% of Canadians actually have a charitable bequest within their wills. So the opportunity of recognizing how much money might be paid in a tax within the estate that can be minimized or can be directed towards a charitable purpose is an opportunity that we can take a look at. Third is looking at the opportunity of registered investments. And in some cases, this is kind of like a very unique way to start thinking about leaving something in an estate, or better still, if you click on the willable component, taking a percentage or all of the registered investment, and how that can be facilitated for the purposes of a charitable gift. And then last but not least is the endowment. Having a fund, having a fund in your family name, leaving something that can be a permanent means of charitable giving on an ongoing basis is the beauty that the Community Foundation offers, as well as a number of other organizations that can benefit by having sort of an evergreen fund that they can actually turn to and generate an income from over time. So let's start off with the simple area, and that is if we look at the notion of giving now. Well, giving now is, the way Giftabulator is constructed, it's to look at, where you live and where you pay tax. What your tax bracket may be, and we can change these numbers around very easily to represent, various income levels that would represent the tax bracket. Then we start to look at, the different ways that people can give. So we can look at majority of individuals give by writing a check or putting it on their credit card. and then they get a receipt for it, and that is an important step for any organization to very simply take a look at the fact and recognize the fact that they are receiving support from their community, from their donors, and they are receiving it and in the form of, a cash donation. But there are other options that are available to look at, and stocks and mutual funds might be considered as part of this scenario. Now, the reason why we have cash, stock, and mutual fund listed here is because those are probably the most common forms of assets that are being held. Liquid assets versus equities, stocks, and other investment vehicles. But when we start to look at it from the standpoint of being a generous donor, we start to look at, we'll pick a stock and assume that the stock is worth $75,000 and the individual paid 50,000. So now what you can see is that we're being able to actually change the numbers. And if you went on the CFPEI site, you would be able to actually access this and play around with this yourself, where no data is being stored, nothing is being retrieved. This is meant to be for your privacy, and there is no information that is being gathered. Your email information is not. This is meant for you to actually look at illustrations for your purposes, as well as share with your family, as well as share with your advisors or advisors to actually sit and illustrate for families different scenarios that may lead them to start thinking about philanthropic planning. So what would happen if from this appreciated asset that there was a donation that was made, and that donation might be $5,000. So we're going to look at it that way. And the $5,000 donation, if this were in the form of cash, that would be $2,659. $2,659 is the cost of the cash donation. Versus if they were to transfer the shares, it'd be looking at the cost of $2,350. Now, keep in mind that the cash donation, the value of this $5,000 was probably $7,000 because this is a donation that's made after tax versus the $5,000 that would be coming out of the appreciated asset to make the donation is just going to be the actual cost of the donation. So we can actually see how we break down the comparison between the two $5,000 donations that can be made, one out of cash, realizing that the $5,000 donation actually cost them more than $5,000 versus looking at the appreciated asset donation, whether it's from a stock or from a mutual fund, and to illustrate the fact that the net cost is less than the cash cost. And if we start to get into larger numbers, like say this number happened to be 10,000, now we're going to see 10,000. Now we're going to start to see a bit of a widening in terms of the benefit of looking at an appreciated asset gift. There's also the opportunity for individuals to start thinking about multi-year giving and to look at, they can actually pick 2 years to actually realize whatever number it would be, to look at, this over a 3-year period of time and start to look at, what the net and what the costs would be over that time frame. But let's go back to that 1-year time period and then start to look at the other part, and that is on your appreciated assets, how much would you like to leave to CRA? So we start to look at numbers that may apply for the benefit of the individual. And we start to look at it from, how does this $5,000 donation help reduce the tax from $4,492 on the appreciated asset down to $2,151? and then benefiting through the tax credit. But if we start to look at maybe this might be $7,000, now we're starting to reduce the tax number again. So the ability to go from these tabs and starting to look at what the benefits may be that can accrue for the individual, as well as reducing the tax via philanthropic giving, this is an opportunity that presents itself. So again, we can go back to looking at the donation. Well, the benefit here is you can see between 32.71 and 37 is a almost $500 or $400 and some odd change. But the ideal situation here is to take the next steps, and you can contact your lawyer, financial advisor, and you can look at this as you can share this by clicking this donation button. The idea is this type of a donation, if it were done in concert with your advisors, can benefit you and make sure that you're doing this correctly. Secondly, you can contact Kent through the contact button here as well, so you can actually see for yourself how that can be facilitated. The beauty of this is you can actually print out by clicking that print button and actually have the scenario outlined exactly the way that you presented it, and you can then you can save it and go from there. The other opportunity, again, is you can just email this to advisors, to your friends, to your family, and you can take this specific scenario and have this sent onward. Last but not least, from that printed function is you've got a report, and the report then takes into consideration all of the assumptions that were put in place based on the capital gains, based on the total the income, and that's the tax bracket, looking at the values, looking at the appreciated values, looking at the marginal rate, looking at the transfer of this amount of money. So it helps sort of outline based on the way you have played around with this for the benefit of your planning. So as we always look at, the most important part that is incorporated within this is that story that one donor had when he said, you know what, I can look at making this donation and I could write a check for the donation. But the reality is I'd rather have the organization receive my donation and not the government, in terms of if I can be moving the tax money that I would be owing if I sold my shares, I'd rather transfer the shares and to the organization for the benefit of realizing what can be accomplished and what kind of impact I can have with my donation. So that basically covers off Give Now. And I encourage each and every one of you to actually take the opportunity to play around with it and see how it might apply to your planning. But at the same time, if you have any questions, by all means, you can ask Kent or me. But through Kent, we're happy to sort of weigh in and then have a discussion with you further. But let's take the next step. And the next step is kind of an interesting, and that is how individuals can look at utilizing their registered investments as part of their will planning, or as part of their long-term estate planning, and maybe potentially using their registered investments now to make a donation. Now, this isn't something that can take place if it's just to be incorporated as part of a bequest. You can definitely designate the beneficiary of the community foundation or any other organizations within that framework of your registered donation. But what's really been interesting is how organizations have been looking at utilizing the registered investment vehicle to actually think about giving a percentage of that RRSP or RIF to charity now. And one of the ways to look at it is if a person decided, I'm not going to need my registered investment. I may not need all of it. I may not need some of it. Whatever it happens to be. But one of the things that we look at is if a person were to think about leaving a percentage of their RRSP, whatever that number may be, and they can actually play around with this number. So if it were 30%, let's see what 30% would be. We know that 30% of 500 is 150. So we start to see that tax minimization has already gone down from 226 to 148,000 and what's left for the heirs, because there's always this, like, what are my heirs going to be getting if they're going to be, if this is part of it or if it's not going to be a part of it. But this is a vehicle that individuals can start thinking about. And one of the ways that you can think about doing this in through the channels of the CRA is through a T1213 form. So we include the T1213 form here that just can open up, and it can actually, the T12 is the request to reduce tax deductions at source. And this is something that should be undertaken with your accountant and your financial advisor, because the T1213 is filled out by the accountant. It's uploaded. It's sent to CRA with a donor agreement, and it has sort of the asset, the registered asset associated with it, how much it would be, how much is going to get transferred over. And the idea is that this is an opportunity if an individual is not going to require or some of it or all of the registered investment. Now, CRA then takes this and then they do their due diligence on it and then either approve it or they don't approve it. So doing something before year end, I don't think would fit with with CRA's time frame in terms of approving something for 2025, not like giving now where it still takes time. And giving now is, if it's going to be a gift of cash, it's easy. If it's a gift from shares, it's a little bit more complicated than transferring, than writing a check. But if it's mutual funds, it depends on the mutual funds and how long it takes to actually process the transfer of the shares of the mutual fund from whatever kind of pooled fund it might be. So that may not necessarily be the ideal fit for, since we're on Giving Tuesday, the 2nd of December, between now and year end. But that is something that would be discussed between yourselves and your advisors. But this is another very powerful, interesting donation tool that can clearly have a significant impact for organizations that you look at supporting. So when we start to look at it from that perspective, then what we're starting to see is, these are opportunities that people can kind of play around with and say, I'm looking at, reducing my tax, and how much would if I had to do 80% of that amount, that would be $400,000. What are my heirs left with, and what's the tax benefit, and what's the tax that would be still owing on this? We had a very interesting situation, a number of years ago when I was making a presentation just like this one. And a lady came to me and said, I saw your presentation and I've got a very large RIF, and it was a ginormous RIF, and it was $13 million. And first question was, how do you get a RIF to be $13 million when you're retired, when you are retired and well into your years? And she said, my husband was a very shrewd investor. He passed on. I inherited the RIF, and I don't want the government to get anything. So my first question was, okay, so what organizations do you want to give to? She says, I'm not really sure. So went through a little bit of a process, and then she said, I also have 6 months to live. So I want to do something and I want to see it in action and I want to see the benefit of it as whatever I can be doing now. And so it really took a conversation with her advisors, lawyers, accountants, financial advisors to actually look at what can be accomplished. And it was the largest donation to the Toronto Public Library in their history. And so she, she lived her life, she accomplished what she wanted to accomplish, and it was something that all the advisors, if we got together, could look at a solution. Now, many individuals require their registered investments for the rest of their lives, but there are those individuals who have enough funds in other areas, another income coming in from other sources, that this may be an ideal vehicle to think about for charitable giving. So then we kind of come to the area that I began talking about, and that was estate planning. So individuals over the age of 50 in Canada, 60% do not have a current will. So when we sort of talk about a current will, what is a current will? Well, the definition of a current will for many individuals is have you updated your will in the last 7 years? So to say that 60% of these individuals have not updated their wills in the last 7 years, they may actually have designations and beneficiaries outlined in their existing will. The chances of them having a charitable bequest in their will, as I mentioned earlier, is low because 4% of Canadians have something in their will as a charitable bequest. Now, now, why would somebody actually think about, leaving something to charity in their will? Well, one of the ways to look at it is this. Again, you could click on Willable and you can actually see for yourself. You can have all the different provinces and territories. The value of the estate might be this. The original cost would be that. And this value is calculated by not including insurance, not including their principal residence, and not including their registered investments. This is just a pure asset appreciation of appreciated assets. So when we start to look at how much tax might be owing on this particular estate, it's just under $50,000. But there are ways of looking at this might be leaving a specific amount to charity, eliminating the tax, eliminating this amount. So if they left a specific amount, how much would then be donated through the bequest, and how much would the heirs be left with? Leaving a percentage of their estate to charity is another way of looking at it. So if they left a specific amount, and let's just say they're going to say, I'm going to leave $25,000, which would be the largest donation that they'll ever make in their entire lives. So if we looked at it that way, the $25,000 would give them a tax credit of $11,891. And then the new tax number from 48 is 36. But more importantly, this is what their heirs are going to be left with. So we start to look at the number one consideration for individuals is, what will I be leaving to my heirs? So we really want to focus and highlight on that. We want to address the fact that they're going to leave something, which is great, and that'll help them and with the tax minimization. But then we start to see where the tax number lands. We could look at it as a percentage. So if we started to look at, something like leaving a percentage, and we said that percentage is going to be, say, 5%. How about if we did it at 7%? So that would be 35,000. And we start to see the tax number changing, tax credit, and what the heirs are going to be left with. So how about if we started to look at eliminating the tax? So how much would they have to donate to eliminate the tax, to get the tax credit to equal the tax owing? And then what's left for the heirs? So when we start to play around with these types of scenarios, it's really, at your fingertips. It happens within seconds, and you can actually spend time to play around with these numbers and these scenarios, whether it's for estate planning, and many organizations are looking at having these types of conversations. But sometimes these conversations are very sensitive and very delicate. But being able to provide a link to something like Giftabulator that'll help illustrate the opportunities for thinking about philanthropic giving that won't impact the individual's lifestyles. And so there's always that important message. Contact your professional advisor. Talk to your accountant, talk to your lawyer, talk to your financial advisor. Provide them with the fact that you've taken a look and you started to think about scenarios that may be beneficial to you and to your family, but also to your community. So we kind of come out of that. The the community foundation as a whole is really there to help create specific funds that have an impact for the benefit of Prince Edward Island. So when we start to look at how do we look at these funds, and so the idea is we created an endowment feature. So the endowment is if you were to create a fund with your organization or the community foundation or any kind of fund that you might be looking at, the idea may be that a fund the objective of creating the fund might be something that would be constructed over a multi-year period of time. So it isn't that easy always to sit down and just write out a check or make a donation for $50,000. But to take into consideration what the return on the investment is for funds within the CFPEI and looking at this over a multi-year period of time, what we'd be looking at is $10,000 and how $10,000 would grow over that period of time. So when we start to look at if it's a 6% ROI, okay, and the disbursement on that is 4%, and the fund management fee is 2%, this will grow 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. And then the impact of the donation would be seen on an annualized basis, that the income that would come off of it, as we looked at, the 4% would be 400, 800, 1200, 1600. So that would be the impact of the donation over time. And so a $50,000 donation with a disbursement would be looking at how these numbers start to manage themselves out after the fees are incorporated. But this becomes a really interesting scenario. So let's just take that Willable that we looked at and start to look at this being a $150,000 contribution. So let's assume that this $150,000 then would go in, and we would just say that would be 150,000. It would be done over 1 year, and we want to show the 6% ROI, and then we're going to show the 150,000 and what does it generate every single year. So now, for that family, for that donor to actually be able to have this type of an annualized distribution is significant for an organization, for a program, for the operations, or for whatever purposes they have established that fund for. So that's the idea of being able to actually connect the abilities of looking at different assets to be drawing from, and then taking those assets that are utilized to be either reinvesting into an endowment fund, to be directly giving through the community foundation or from your organization, or whatever it happens to be. But this is the crossover point. This is the nexus of bringing. It's like looking at a Venn diagram. You've got the community foundation or charitable organizations. you've got the donors in Prince Edward Island, and then you've got the advisors. And then when we can bring those three Venn diagrams, Venn circles together, we're creating a point where Giftabulator actually can bring the different tactics, strategies, illustrations that help an individual understand how they can be looking and thinking about giving now, how they can be thinking about their estate plans. And these are things that are kind of on an ongoing basis, which would be very beneficial on the from Willable's perspective for 2026. And then looking at Willable registered investments, again, something for 2026 and beyond, and how those two can be factored in with the options around giving now, giving with pre-tax versus after tax. And we always know that the after tax is from the checking account, and there's always fewer dollars in the checking account, whereas it's a big bucket for the assets. So when you start to think about your assets and the appreciation of your assets and the taxation on your assets, that presents itself as one of the more attractive ways to thinking about making a philanthropic donation. So we can actually come from a scenario like this and to look at what this might end up resulting for the individual. And if they looked at doing this to establish a fund, that might be, let's just say it's going to be $15,000, which would be a very generous donation. We start to see what the actual cost would be of making this type of a donation. And then we'd say this, remember, the cash donation would actually cost more than 50,000. The asset donation is being transferred directly in kind. So we'd look at a $15,000 donation. And if we went and put that into the endowment fund, we'd be looking at, and let's say they decided to do the 15,000 over 3 years. That might be an option for them to look at. There's 5, 10, 15, and 15,000. And this is what the 15,000 stays there in perpetuity. And it generates on an evergreen basis an outcome that would have a tremendous impact for the province. So I think we've come to the point where if you have any questions at this point, I'm happy to answer. But I thank everyone for taking the time and showing the interest in this presentation as well, and your interest in the Community Foundation of Prince Edward Island. So back to you, Kent.
Thanks, Bill. Lots to digest there, and it's really going back to the first time you and I chatted. It was just really impressive to kind of visualize that kind of impact, and that's why we went down this path, and that we licensed the technology to put on our website, because it is pretty powerful for people to get a chance to see it. So thank you very much, and thanks to everyone else for joining us today. Um, as mentioned earlier, we will share a link to this recording just in case you wanted to review or kind of refresh it again. But you can also reach out to myself anytime, or Bill for that matter, and we'll assist in any way we possibly can. Again, the neat thing about us as a foundation is that most people, Bill said the term vehicle, and that Giftabulator is a vehicle. Well, so are we. That's exactly what we do. If you're a donor, we can help you give to other charities. Yes, you can give to us as well, but it's really about us kind of taking that and allowing you to build your legacy. So thank you very much, Bill, for presenting today. And I do want to say a quick thank you again to Provincial Credit Union and PEI Mutual, solely because we can't do these kinds of things without that support. And we're not normally a spot that has, sponsors or partners of that nature. So it's really important for us. And again, I really do thank everyone for joining us today and taking time out of your busy schedules, especially as we get into the December and Christmas and year-end season. And hope you have a great remainder of your day. And I hope that we get a chance to communicate again sometime in the future. And thank you very much for taking part.